Hello, I'm Douglas from Gaijin-Eyes. They say that before you can walk, you have to learn to crawl, and before you can run, you have to learn to walk. Looking at BCC Title Studio, there are very many excellent tutorials by Ben Brownlee on running in Title Studio. Ben also has a number of excellent tutorials where he drops the pace and shows you how to walk in Title Studio. I'd like to drop the pace even further and go all the way back to showing you how to crawl in Title Studio. By learning to crawl, you'll have a good base to build on in the future. Let's get down to it and start crawling around. A typical setup in the host application can look something like this. There will be two tracks. The lower track here is a scene with a spoonbill, and the upper track has carp streamers. The upper track is going to be used for the Title Studio composition. This track is commonly called a placeholder. Now it's important to realize that when you drop the Title Studio plugin onto this track, it will take over the track completely. Let me show you. We go over to the Effect panel, and in BCC 3D Objects, we twirl down and find Title Studio. When I drag this and drop it onto the placeholder track, you see? The carp streamers disappeared, and instead is the startup title in Title Studio. So you can see that the type of media which you use for your placeholder isn't so important, as Title Studio will take over the media and replace it with its own composition. Now it's time to launch the user interface and get into Title Studio. Here in Title Studio, when using it for the first time, I like to make some changes to the appearance of the user interface. To do that, go up to Edit, down to Preferences, and in this window under Appearance, Colors, I like to change the background window to a lighter color. OK. Then I like to make sure the text is pure white. And finally, the timeline selection. This is where you'll be able to see which track on your timeline is active. I usually go here and change this to a brighter green. OK. OK. The changes will become apparent after you click on the user interface. There we are. And you can see, if I move and activate a track, now it is this greenish blue color, making it easier to see. The next thing I look for when I begin is this key. It can either be on like this, red, or it can be off. If it's red, it means that whenever you make changes to parameters, keyframes will appear on the timeline. I find it much easier to keep control of what happens with keyframes and their parameters by switching this off, so that the only keyframes which will be created will be the ones I decide myself. You can activate the different panels in the user interface by clicking on an area inside. When I click, you'll see a yellow border appears around the active panel. If I click on the Tools panel, you can see the yellow border. If I click on the Composite Window panel, you can see the yellow border. It's very important to make sure you have the correct panel active, especially when you're down and working on the timeline. You should make sure that you are selecting the correct track before you make any changes to the values. Title Studio usually opens with Boris Effects as the default text, and the text window is open. We're going to look at this window and the settings down here in a later tutorial. The panel which you will be making most changes to is up here, the Controls panel. The content of the Controls panel change depending on which track you select down here. For example, if you keep your eye on the tabs at the top of the Control panel for the text, when I change to the Container track, you see that the tabs change as well. If I go down into Boris Effects and I choose this one or this one, once again I'd like to stress the importance of making sure you have selected the correct track before changing anything in the Controls panel. In the Composite window, I like to switch on the Title Safe area, and you do that here. You can select Title Safe as well as a grid and rulers. I usually have only Title Safe. Also, something we'll look closer at later is this panel here called the Preview Background. At the moment I have set it as Composite over Color, and will be using it like this in most of the tutorials. Down here on the Preview Quality, you have a choice of Draft or High. If your computer is powerful enough, I would recommend having it on High. Now I'd like to look closer at the Controls panel in conjunction with the Composite window. The position of this text on the screen is determined here by the value for position X and position Y. You can change these values in a number of ways. For example, you can left-click in the box and enter a new number. 940, for example, will move my title 20 pixels to the left. You can also change by clicking and holding down the left button until you see this double-headed arrow. By keeping the left button down, you can drag left or right. In this case, we are on the Y-axis. If you want to reset the values to get back to the center position, the easiest way is by clicking on this Center Position button. A third way, and a more precise one, is by hovering over the value you want to change, and then just use the scroll wheel on your mouse. If I begin moving my scroll wheel, you can see the values are changing incrementally. By the way, not all values can be adjusted in this way. You can also move objects on the screen by using the three interactors. I'll move them to the side so we can see them more clearly. The green interactor will move the object on the Y-axis only. Move here, it turns yellow, left click, and now you can drag this along the Y-axis. You can't drag it on the X or the Z axis. Go to the red arrow. When it turns yellow, left click. Now you can drag on the X axis, but not on the Y or Z axis. The Z axis is here in the corner. You can see the point turning yellow. If you drag on it, the title will move closer to or further from the camera. It appears to change size, but in actual fact the text is the same font size all the time. It's just the distance from the camera that's changing. If you move to a point between the X and the Y axis, a yellow square appears, and now you can drag the interactor freely around the screen on the X and Y axis. Also in the control panel are these very important squares. It's here that you set interpolation. The interpolation you set for a keyframe will determine how the value of its parameters will change from that keyframe to the next one. I'll click here and you can see that this keyframe at the moment is set as constant. It means that for the whole timeline this value will be the same. Hold sounds like the same as constant, but it's different. Hold doesn't affect the whole timeline. It only affects from the keyframe it's on until it comes to the next keyframe where there is a change in interpolation type. Linear is the one I use most of the time when creating animations on the screen. We won't examine the remaining ones for the time being. We'll take a closer look at them when we use them in future tutorials. At the bottom of the composite window are two lines with time codes. The duration is the length of your timeline track. Normally, Title Studio will set it to the same value as your placeholder. The time below shows the position of the cursor. We refer to the cursor as the CTI, or Current Time Indicator. Just now it's at 5:07. If I press Home on the keyboard, nothing happens. The reason why nothing happened when I pressed Home is because at the moment focus is on the controls panel. You see the yellow line around it. I first have to click on the timeline to change the focus to the timeline. Now if I press Home, the CTI jumps home and the time indicator shows 0. I am a great believer in trying to learn keyboard shortcuts as soon as I begin learning how to use a new application. Not only does it help to speed up my workflow, it also helps increase my accuracy. Starting from the next tutorial, I'll be gradually introducing you to keyboard shortcuts. And that's all for this one. Hope to see you in the next tutorial. Bye for now.